I don't think I need to stress the importance of the issue of trying to deal with the situation in Afghanistan. It's been part of our debate, part of the presidential discussions for the last year and more, and so we're going to hear from people who really understand this situation. I want to turn the moderation over to my colleague, Alex Thier. He's a soothsayer. We have a lot of smart people on the staff. Alex has just written and published a book called The Future of Afghanistan, so he may know something that all of us may not know. But Alex, will you please introduce your panel? And we look forward to a very lively discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Dick, for your great and fearless leadership. This has been a magnificent day, and I think we're in for a magnificent close. I'm Alex Thier, the Senior Rule of Law Advisor at the U.S. Institute of Peace and Director of the Institute's Future of Afghanistan project, and I'm thrilled to be moderating this remarkable panel concerning one of the greatest foreign policy challenges facing the United States today. The U.S. Institute of Peace is heavily engaged in working to create a better future in Afghanistan. We have an office on the ground in Kabul and support several partner organizations, as well as a growing network of peace mediators around the country. Much of our work there to date has focused on establishing the rule of law, building relationships between state justice institutions and informal or tribal mechanisms that are prevalent throughout the country, as well as efforts to end impunity and make the powerful accountable to the law. We also bring together all manner of people here in Washington, policymakers, soldiers, diplomats, and academics, to exchange ideas, inform the public, and encourage them to think in new directions about the challenges facing Afghanistan and the region. As Dick mentioned, today we are launching our new book, The Future of Afghanistan, which is a collection of essays by leading thinkers that looks at Afghanistan in a longer-term perspective. The purpose of this book and the project as a whole is to get past the usual short-term thinking to formulate a realistic and coherent strategy for Afghanistan going forward. And there are copies in the back if you haven't gotten one. Our time is short, and we have a panel of exceptional expertise and wisdom. You have their bios in front of you, and a decent introduction for each of them would eat up all the time we have. So I'll just briefly remind you of who each is now. Our first speaker is Ashraf Ghani, former Afghan finance minister and governor of its central bank, and one of the world's leading voices on how to address weak and failing states. Our second speaker is General David Petraeus, the United States CENTCOM commander and perhaps the leading military figure of his generation. Our third speaker is Francesc Vendrell, former EU and UN Special Representative for Afghanistan. Francesc has been the Dean of the Diplomatic Corps in Kabul for much of the last decade. And finally, we have Representative Tom Perriello, one of our newest members of Congress, who won a remarkable and remarkably close race in Virginia this fall. Tom is a human rights lawyer who has worked on post-conflict justice around the world, including in Afghanistan. Each of our panelists will speak for 10 minutes, and although time is quite short, we hope that there will be some time for questions at the end. So without further ado, I give the floor to Ashraf Ghani.
It is an honor and a pleasure to be with you and to participate in such a distinguished panel, all of whom have made or are in the process of making significant contributions to peace and stability in Afghanistan. I would also like to thank Ambassador Brahimi, who is in the audience and is the godfather of bond process and the peace in Afghanistan, and Ambassador Finn, who did so much. And then thank USIP in general and Alex Thier in particular for their commitment to Afghanistan. As far as governance of the economy and polity in Afghanistan is concerned, we are at a fork between two known roads. The first is the road of narcotics, criminalization of the economy, corruption of governance, and the erosion of trust of the population, leading to prolonged conflict, instability, and violence. According to various indices, Afghanistan is now the fourth most war-torn country, the fifth most corrupt country, and the seventh most fragile state in the world. As a result, media commentary in the West is increasingly focusing on this vicious circle. The second alternative road, however, is predicated on a competitive economy revolving around agriculture, mining, and services, an effective state that performs core functions for its citizens, and a national identity that renews the tolerant and cosmopolitan values of Afghanistan's Islamic civilization and embraces a place in our global society. Taking this road will not only lead to peace, prosperity, and stability through a virtuous circle, but will turn Afghanistan into a bridge between the Islamic and Western worlds. In late 2001, international intervention in Afghanistan was based on twin pillars of legitimacy: unanimity of the General Assembly and Security Council of the UN, and the enthusiastic welcome accorded to international security forces by the Afghan population. However, a double failure of both the Afghan government and the international community has led us to this vicious circle in which there has been a privatization of politics and a politicization of the private sector. The international community, instead of designing instruments suited to context, has relied on generic development tools and approaches that have undermined state capacity and legitimacy and failed to understand the central message of the counterinsurgency doctrine that General Petraeus has done so much to remind us that people must be at the center of any effort to create stability. As the vicious circle in Afghanistan was not inevitable, we can be optimistic that the virtuous circle is still possible. The priority assigned by the new administration to Afghanistan provides the opportunity for the development of a focused international strategy, while the forthcoming elections in Afghanistan itself provides the possibility of a renewed contract between the Afghan people and our government. Afghan politics is two faces. One is network of violence and corruption, both inside and outside the government. The other is a proliferation of social groups, women's groups, youth groups, and urban volunteer associations, which demonstrate deep cravings for justice, law and order, and a functioning polity and economy. The presidential election, if conducted in a free and fair manner, will allow these new forces of order to acquire voice, to articulate the need for binding social contract, develop a national consensus on the way forward, and begin to implement an agenda for building an effective state. Success in Afghanistan will not be brought about through military means alone. The counterinsurgency doctrine has made it abundantly clear that successful counterinsurgency operations are only 20% about military solutions and 80% about political governance and economic solutions. The task at hand, therefore, is to arrive at a strategy that makes use of national and international instruments of power to systematically reduce the use of force. This requires maximum utilization of Afghan assets and capabilities, ranging from our natural capital to social and human capital, supported by the international community rather than ignored or substituted for through parallel development projects and systems. For the international community to become a catalyst for state building in Afghanistan, the following steps are necessary. First, design counterinsurgency operations in a manner that places the needs and aspirations of the Afghan people at center stage. Avoid the unsuccessful tactics used by the Soviet Army in Afghanistan, and articulate a clear strategy for securing, governing, and developing. Afghanistan is spatially diverse, and the needs of regions that are currently peaceful need to be given equal priority to those where the insurgency is its strongest. Moreover, if counterinsurgency effort is to become the foundation for a state-building strategy, then it needs to frame security within a larger framework of law and order. Second, the international community needs to arrive at a clear understanding of the functions of the state in the levels at which these functions must be performed. Afghanistan has 5 levels of governance: village, district, municipality, province, and central government. Legally, it's a unitary state, but it is effectively highly decentralized. Measures for support of each level of governance and mechanisms of international engagement, such as PRTs, must therefore be reframed to create alignment of state effectiveness at all levels. The success of the National Solidarity Program, something that Bob Zelek reminded us this afternoon, a program of block grants directed to villages, indicates that Afghan citizens are willing to do the heavy lifting of development when given the decision right and resources. The National Telecom Program indicates how the regulatory function of the government can be used to encourage the private sector to provide services. This program brought about an increase from 100 mobile phones in 2002 to the current estimate of 7.5 million phones, simultaneously creating one of the largest sources of fiscal revenue for the government. 3, a landlocked country where narcotics play such a large role requires the design of an economic policy tailored to unique contextual assets, capabilities, and constraints. The aid system is shown little ability to come forward with such a design, and therefore innovation should come from outside this system and draw on the most innovative minds that exist across the business, social, and government sectors. 4th, overcoming the challenge presented by narcotics in Afghanistan requires international partnership on designing and implementing an innovative agricultural strategy that could increase the income of rural Afghans from $1 to $4 per capita, which is the deciding point between engagement in legal and illegal economies. The feasibility of this approach depends on 2 conditions, beginning firstly with market access to Europe, the Gulf, China, and India, but particularly NATO and US forces as consumers of Afghan produce. Second, investment in infrastructure and institutional support mechanisms that have been proven necessary to underpin successful agricultural development. 5th, investment in youth through vocational and higher education needs to become a priority. Harnessing the global communication revolution could provide Afghan youth, who constitute a majority of the population, with access at minimal cost to institutions of learning across the globe, and thereby turn them into stakeholders in the prosperity and stability of the global system. 6th, the international community needs to shift from the role as a substitutor to that as a partner and catalyst for good governance. This means a commitment, both on the part of the Afghan leaders and international actors, to clear criteria for transparency, accountability, and mutual responsibility. Such an approach, in turn, will require changes in the current instruments of foreign aid and a shift from short-term biannual financial support to medium to long-term mechanism for resource allocation and effective utilization. Afghanistan was the first challenge of the 21st century to our inherited institutions of the 20th century. The performance thus far has been decidedly mixed, as these organizations have failed to overcome the organizational stovepipes of security, diplomacy, and development. Getting Afghanistan right is not just important for Afghanistan's sake, but for the creation of global capacity to deal with international challenges. With the commitment of the new administration to Afghanistan, the deep reflection on counterinsurgency, the increasing acknowledgement of the centrality of effective states by both the development and security communities, the conditions exist for a type of approach that can devise strategies suited to context. The people of Afghanistan are ready for fundamental change and want nothing more than to lead normal lives. We hope that the international community is ready to partner with us and embark on the difficult but promising journey of transforming Afghanistan into a state that can fulfill its obligation towards its citizens, the region, and the world at large. Thank you.
Thank you, General Petraeus.
Well, good afternoon. Alex, thanks for this opportunity. USIP, thanks for organizing such an important gathering, and I see that congratulations are in order on your 25th anniversary. And I, too, want to start by saluting Ambassador Lakhdar Brahimi, the SRSG in Haiti, for whom many of us were privileged to serve, and a man who has contributed so much in so many difficult places over the years and it's a privilege to see him again here. One observation up front, if I could, Alex. I have to tell you that requiring a U.S. Army general officer to speak without PowerPoint slides is a violation of the standards in the U.S. Army Field Manual on interrogation techniques. But I'll try to do my best without our normal communications aids as we tackle this important topic. Afghanistan is obviously a topic of enormous importance, not just to the United States, as Ashraf made very clear, but to all the alliance coalition countries and the world. It is imperative that Afghanistan not become again a sanctuary for transnational violent extremists. It was for that reason that the United States took action in Afghanistan over 7 years ago, and that basic objective remains valid today. The past 7 years have seen accomplishments and setbacks in Afghanistan. There's been agreement on a constitution and a government, increased access to education and telecommunications, construction of infrastructure, establishment of various national institutions, improvements in certain basic services, development of the Afghan National Army, and so on. But we've also seen reconstitution of the Taliban and al-Qaeda and other extremist elements, a corresponding spiral downward in security, especially in the east and south, the emergence of considerable corruption problems, the expansion until last year at least of poppy production, and numerous challenges in developing governmental institutions and local police that have legitimacy in the eyes of the people. There has been nothing easy about Afghanistan. Indeed, virtually every aspect has been hard, and that will continue to be the case in 2009 and the years beyond. In my brief comments here this afternoon, I'll seek to make 3 points. First, that Afghanistan is not Iraq. Second, that the effort in Afghanistan will require not just more U.S. coalition and Afghan forces, but also a more comprehensive and coordinated effort than has been the case to date. And third, that achieving progress in Afghanistan will require a regional approach. First, I said, is the fact that Afghanistan is not Iraq. We and our Afghan and coalition partners are in a tough fight in Afghanistan, and the natural tendency will be to look to the ways in which progress was achieved in Iraq for possible answers. In this regard, it's important to remember a key principle of counterinsurgency operations, that every case is unique and requires a carefully designed approach that is appropriate to the specific situation. Thus, while, as Ashraf pointed out, the principles of counterinsurgency operations remain very valid, concepts such as the importance of securing and serving the population and the necessity of living among the people in order to do so, these principles nonetheless have to be adapted to the unique cultural, political, geographic, and human terrain of Afghanistan. In examining this terrain, it's abundantly clear just how different Afghanistan is from Iraq. A few comparisons. Afghanistan is more than 200,000 square miles larger than Iraq, with a population of 5 million more and borders that are almost 2,000 miles longer than Iraq's, which are plenty challenging themselves. Dominated by the rugged Hindu Kush, much of Afghanistan is extremely harsh mountainous terrain, while Iraq, outside the northern Kurdish areas, is relatively flat. Weather in Afghanistan, of course, is much more extreme than that of Iraq as well. Hence, our operations there must always confront what our commanders call the tyrannies of distance, topography, and weather that are much more challenging than those in Iraq and are aggravated further by the relative lack of infrastructure in Afghanistan as well. In addition to the kaleidoscope of ethnic, sectarian, and tribal elements in Afghanistan, other elements of the human terrain are also quite different from those in Iraq. Afghanistan has, for example, significantly higher illiteracy rates and much less of the well-educated human capital that exists in Iraq, even after the sectarian violence in Iraq prompted some 2 million of their citizens to leave the country. Additionally, while Iraq has had experience and muscle memory, if you will, of a strong central government, Afghanistan's experience has been quite different, with, in general, much greater autonomy exercised by tribal elements and other local and regional strongmen. Afghanistan also lacks the incredible natural resource blessings of Iraq. It does have significant mineral resources and could certainly be an exporter of significant quantities of certain agricultural products as well, but these pale by comparison with the potential wealth of Iraq's resources. As a result, while Iraq this past year generated nearly $60 billion in oil export revenue alone, Afghanistan's total revenue generation was well under $1 billion. Finally, although Afghanistan has achieved progress in certain basic service provisions since 2001, it still lags well behind Iraq in provision of electricity, drinking water, and education, particularly in the rural areas. For all of Iraq's shortcomings, it does have relatively mature, if poorly maintained, infrastructure that has been and is being rebuilt, while Afghanistan, again, has very little by comparison. In Afghanistan, it is important to remember that we are helping the Afghans construct basic infrastructure, not reconstruct it. Having highlighted those differences between Afghanistan and Iraq, now let me turn to my second point and highlight the need for our commitment to be sustained, comprehensive, and coordinated. After a trip to Afghanistan in September 2005 to evaluate the Afghan security force development effort, I offered to Secretary Rumsfeld an assessment that Afghanistan would likely be the longest campaign in the long war. Developments in recent years appear to have validated that conclusion. As such, achieving progress, needless to say, will take time. And our commitment, including our combat forces, enablers, training teams, and others, will have to be sustained. Our commitment must also extend well beyond the security realm. To be sure, it's vital that the coalition and our Afghan partners arrest and then reverse the downward spiral in security. Doing so, however, will require progress not just in the security arena, but in a host of other areas as well. In development of infrastructure and building governmental capacity and reducing corruption and other practices that undermine governmental legitimacy, and in development of the rule of law that Ashraf also highlighted. And in the year ahead, of course, we'll also have to help our Afghan partners conduct and secure national elections that are seen to be legitimate by the people of Afghanistan. Voter registration, for which, by the way, has gone relatively smoothly so far in the first 3 of 4 phases, albeit with registration in the toughest areas soon to begin. These many challenges will require not just a comprehensive commitment, but also one that achieves unity of effort between Afghan and coalition elements and together with international and non-governmental organizations. Certainly, as I noted earlier, we'll need more coalition and Afghan security forces, including the additional training teams to help develop and enable the Afghan National Army and the Afghan National Police. But we'll also need more civilian contributions and greater international involvement to enable a whole of governments, plural, approach that is unified and coordinated between all of those involved. Now, just as we can't focus on only one line of operation, we also can't focus just on Afghanistan. It's not possible to resolve the challenges internal to Afghanistan without addressing the challenges, especially in terms of security related to Afghanistan's neighbors. A regional approach is required. A key element of the regional approach, of course, is Pakistan's recognition that the existential threat to Pakistan comes from the violent extremists operating in the federally administered tribal areas in the Northwest Frontier Province. There's an increasing recognition, in fact, that this threat poses a much greater challenge to Pakistan than does that from its traditional rival, India. Indeed, Afghanistan and Pakistan have, in many ways, merged into a single problem set, and the way forward in Afghanistan is incomplete without a strategy that includes and assists Pakistan and involves India. Beyond Pakistan, the Central Asian states must also be part of a regional strategy for Afghanistan. Certainly no state in the region wants to see Afghanistan harboring and exporting transnational extremists, and the nexus between the Afghan insurgency and narcotics smuggling presents a regional security threat as well. The Central Asian states share the concerns of all about extremism and drug smuggling in Afghanistan, and they also can provide a northern line of communication should that prove necessary. And we are exploring that, as you might imagine. So they clearly must be part of the regional approach as well. Finally, as an aside, there are even common interests between Afghanistan, the coalition, and Iran, though there are also major conflicting interests, needless to say. But I'm happy to leave that element of the regional approach to the diplomats and policymakers. In the end, and in conclusion, much of what we're trying to accomplish will revolve around relationships and involve the human terrain, another point that Ashraf just underscored. We must seek to build and support relationships at every level of endeavor, local, provincial, national, and regional. And as we go forward, it will be incumbent on all of us to demonstrate that the United States and the coalition of countries engaged in Afghanistan are reliable, determined, and consistent partners. Again, partners, not occupiers, another point that Ashraf underscored. As I've sought to convey in my 10 minutes here this afternoon, such partners will have to keep in mind that Afghanistan is not Iraq. They'll have to demonstrate commitment to sustained, comprehensive, coordinated approaches. And they will have to develop and execute a regional strategy that includes Pakistan, India, the Central Asian states, and even China and Russia, along with, perhaps at some point, Iran. The United States and the other members of the coalition have important national interests in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and their neighbors. The common national security imperatives highlighted by 9/11 and by subsequent attacks in a number of other countries still exist. Sanctuaries in which transnational extremists recruit, train, plan, and organize for operations cannot be permitted. This security imperative, though, requires a comprehensive, coordinated, and sustained approach that reflects an unwavering commitment to the region, one that, if properly executed, can help promote security, stability, and, over time, growing prosperity. Thank you very much.
I will omit and I will skip the usual curtsies because they will eat into my time, which is apparently only 10 minutes. Let me first say what I think Afghans want. And I think the first thing Afghans want is security and a modicum of rule of law. I think Afghans want food security, which they don't have at this moment. They want employment. They want better governance at the center and in the provinces and districts. Afghans want radical measures against corruption and an end to the culture of impunity. Afghans once welcomed the international military presence in the belief that it would provide security and an end to decades of misrule. Starting with the US support or lack of interest in removing the warlords and commanders whom the Afghans had come to hate for their misrule in the 1990s, and continuing with the spread of the insurgency and the number of civilian deaths, Afghans increasingly question the value of the international military presence and are beginning to blame it for the country's ills. The initial welcome, as Mr. Brahimi very rightly pointed out, the initial welcome is turning to impatience and even downright hostility. The objectives pursued by the international community and by the Afghan government appear unclear, not to say confused, to many Afghans. One day, they hear that a military solution is impossible. The next day, they see the coalition or ISAF bombing villages. The following day, they hear the president insist that he wants to, quote, negotiate with Mullah Omar, only to hear the same government call the Taliban terrorists. No wonder the Afghans end up believing the wildest conspiracy theories. Rightly or wrongly, the Afghans see us foreigners as complicit in the errors and wrongdoings of their government. What needs to be done? A review of the strategy being pursued needs to be conducted, centered in meeting Afghan grievances and aspirations. A military surge, if it is to take place at all, needs to be part of a broader new strategy. It also needs to encompass Pakistan and Iran and other countries in the region, including India. It is necessary to drastically reduce civilian casualties, even at the cost of risking that insurgents in a town or a village will escape. Otherwise, we are creating more recruits for the Taliban and greater opposition to the Western military presence. As so far, a status of forces agreement is needed. It is better to negotiate it now, when it can be done in an amicable way, than after the Afghans demand it in parliament and it becomes a hot issue in the country. It is essential to redouble efforts to build security, but also rule of law institutions. The issue of food security needs to be urgently addressed, as it is the 3 priorities agreed at the Paris conference in June, namely agriculture, including, I might add, perhaps, why not, subsidies to farmers who grow little crops. We do it in Europe, you do it in America. As well as, in one of the priorities, irrigation and electricity. Now, we have agreed that there is no military solution possible, but we have yet to define what do we mean by a political solution. On reconciliation, it is urgent that the government of Afghanistan defines its framework, establish a central point in the President's office to direct contacts or talks with the Taliban. It is also essential to define who in the Taliban one will be talking to. Perhaps, I would believe, starting with the field commanders. It is necessary also to define red lines for these talks. Delinking the Taliban leadership from Al-Qaeda may not be easy, and it will certainly be hard to verify. It is also essential that we decide and the government of Afghanistan decides what price the Afghans will have to pay for reconciliation with the Taliban. Will it mean the abandonment or curtailing of the objectives agreed at the London conference or in the Afghanistan Compact? On elections, let's be very clear. Non-credible elections this summer would further destabilize the country, and it is hard to see how security can be maintained in a way that such credible elections will be possible. It is also important to nurture and support reformist political parties and civil society organizations. We should be supporting platforms, alliances, and programs rather than individuals. A regional framework that addresses the unresolved Kashmir problem, both in the interest of India in terms of its Muslim minority and in terms of encouraging the Pakistani military to look west rather than east, is also extremely important. We need to rebuild an international consensus around Afghanistan that to some degree was achieved at the time of Bonn. Talking to Iran, which played a helpful role in 2001, 2002, could be one step, and it could be just the one topic on which some understanding may be reached. This dialogue should recognize that Iran is a regional power and that it has legitimate national interest in Afghanistan. Narcotics, for example, could be a useful issue to start the discussions on. I think the US should no longer prevent Afghanistan from signing or reaching a non-aggression pact with Iran. And it would be excellent if the US were also to make it clear that it is not seeking long-term military bases in that country. Finally, about Europe, it will be a hard job to do, even if at the beginning there will be willingness by Europeans to listen to the Obama administration in a way they didn't listen to the Bush administration. But the more Americanized the war becomes, the less likely it is that you will find European countries, with the exception probably of the UK, willing to send more forces or to have a greater commitment in the country. And finally, the UN. The UN needs to be kept in mind. The UN should be the central coordinator of our efforts in Afghanistan. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. It is an honor to be on this panel. Thank you very much for the invitation. My first trip to Afghanistan in 2005 came because a survey had been done, a quantitative survey in the country asking Afghans what was the top security threat. And well over 80% of Afghans said corruption, not the insurgency. I was sent in essentially to debunk this study by running a qualitative survey with a 60-person team of Afghans covering every district of the country. And what came back very clearly was, in fact, an overwhelming majority of Afghans felt that corruption was the single greatest threat to security and stability. Not that the insurgency wasn't, but that it was corruption, in fact, that enabled the insurgency to rebound. If people are offered a choice set between a legitimate, strong government and the Taliban will lose that choice. If it's between what's perceived to be a local narco-trafficking warlord or the Taliban actually does much better in that choice. So we cannot in any way disaggregate the challenges of an anti-corruption agenda with that of fighting the insurgency. The break, there are many points that we can look at as turning points in the situation in Afghanistan, but most on the ground I found both during the trip in 2005 and 2007 felt like the parliamentary elections to some extent in 2005 was a turning point. When there was an opportunity for a vetting process where many Afghans risked their lives to call out by name some of the most corrupt elements, those who were most associated with atrocities in the past and other things, and that list for vetting was eventually whittled down to next to nothing. At that point, many people lost faith in what they saw as a democratic process backed by the U.S. that people had such high hopes for such a long time. Our military has done an excellent job, NATO's done an excellent job, but we are working still in a fairly and increasingly toxic political environment that presents great challenges. In that sense, with the conversation right now about additional battalions in Afghanistan, there's almost no question that it is an important and crucial part of stabilizing the situation there. However, doing so without fundamentally changing the political dynamics on the ground could well be fuel on the fire. What we need is to couple an increased international and U.S. troop presence with what I would call an accountability offensive. We need a serious accountability offensive in Afghanistan. And we need it not just in sort of creative governing solutions like a civilian embed program and local and regional governance modeled on the very successful military embed program that has been going on there. But I mean at least considering some higher risk, higher return efforts at challenging the fundamental issue of corruption. We need to keep in mind with this that warlordism, which I would admit is an overgeneralized term, is nonetheless more of an exogenous than an endogenous presence in Afghan governing structures. We do need to look to empower jirgas, ulamas, other parts of the local governing structure. But the answer right now is not to empower them by militarizing them, but by removing the threats to their power, namely some of these systematic elements of corruption that are going on. While I certainly agree with General Petraeus' remarks and that there are strong differences between the situation in Afghanistan and the situation in Iraq, there are also some similarities. Again, there's a potential to drive wedges between domestic and foreign elements. There are opportunities for a higher risk civilian protection effort that would be greatly appreciated by the Afghans and go a long way in shoring up perceptions of the United States. And we face a legitimacy gap, less of our own presence than of our association with existing, particularly local governing structures. And while that legitimacy gap exists, there are severe limits on what our military is capable of doing and accomplishing in those situations. So there are some similarities in those ways. And I would mention one other thing as a political remark, having taken the step from nonprofit work into politics recently. While there were many great things about the Iraq surge in 2006, I would say my biggest complaint with it, with all due respect, is calling it the surge. I think there has been its accompanying phrase at the time of doubling down on the strategy in Iraq. I think, in fact, what happened was a substantial and very intelligent break from the doctrine preceding it. So where you saw a decline in what you might call the Bush doctrine or an era of fairly arbitrary power, you've seen the emergence of a doctrine of smart power. And I think after 2 election cycles where the American people have expressed great concern with the situation in Iraq, I think we need to prepare them for what may be a sustained effort in Afghanistan and one that gets worse before it gets better. And part of doing that is to give the American people a sense of ownership over this shift. The fact is there was a response to what voters said in 06 and 08. We have seen the emergence, again, of what I would consider an era of smart power. That smart power is defined in part by understanding in the 21st century one of our greatest weapons is that of legitimacy. I was involved in the showdown with the dictator Charles Taylor in Liberia, and I was the special advisor to the prosecutor that issued the war crimes indictments against him. And when we issued those indictments, it was not a risk-free move. Many felt like we were backing him into a corner while the lurid rebels were moving on Monrovia, and I was getting sat phone calls from them every day. But what we knew was we were also creating a new option, which was the possibility for a regime transition based on legitimacy and the rule of law. And eventually that happened through a great combined effort of U.S. troops, regional diplomacy, and the legitimacy of that indictment. I think we exist now at a moment where we have a much expanded tool chest of our options. There is more than simply economic sanctions and military options. I think what we saw in Iraq and what is becoming more clear is that that expanded tool set was engaged. And I think that was a reflection not only of the reality of security on the ground, but also of the political processes. I think we're looking at a move from sort of a head-in-the-sand approach to an ear-to-the-ground approach since 06 that has been crucial. You know, when I was in Kandahar most recently a year and a half ago and having conversations with some of the young men there who were actively being recruited by Taliban, the first hour would always be them telling me everything they thought I wanted to hear and breaking down or building up some room for trust going forward. Many of them had gotten to the point, once we got into the truth period, of actually believing that bin Laden might be on the U.S. payroll. Now, this is because they have reached a point of not understanding the dynamics on the ground and being so frustrated with their local governing structures. Now, what does this mean? This means we have a chance right now because the conflict is not fundamentally ideological there. It's not anti-American sentiment. It's people not wanting their homes blown up. And there's actually great room and great appreciation for much of what the U.S. has done. I think if we can expand that troop presence to provide the security people want with this kind of accountability offensive, we can see the situation shift. My last day in Kabul, one of the security experts there said the insurgency in Afghanistan could outpace the Iraq insurgency in 3 to 4 years if we don't get on top of corruption. But if we do, we can actually see a kind of stabilization, not just there, but across the border and in the region, a region that is of great, great security interest to the United States. I believe this is something that is going to take the same kind of creativity and investment that we have seen in other recent conflicts. But again, we have to understand that if we don't change the political dynamics on the ground, an increased presence may do more harm than good. But if we make that switch together, I think we will see things turn back around there. Thank you very much.
Well, that was not only a terrific discussion thus far, but well on time. And so we are going to have a few minutes for questions. I'm going to ask if we have a number of members of the media here, and so I'm going to take a first question or two from members of the media if there's anybody out there. I have in the far back. It was this gentleman. Okay.
Andrew Gray from Reuters. This is a question in particular for General Petraeus. You talked about common interests with Iran when it comes to Afghanistan. Could you outline a bit more about what those might be?
No, as I said, Andrew, thanks for a great question, but as I said, I'm happy to leave that to the diplomats during a time of transition in Washington.
That will leave a lot more time for questions. Over here.
You have a whole table of diplomats, though.
Elizabeth Buemiller from the New York Times. You talked about a sustained commitment in Afghanistan. Do you envision it as a decade, as is envisioned in this in the book that was put out today? That's the question for General Petraeus. I'm sorry.
I recently did an interview with Foreign Policy, and at the end they asked a similar question, and I actually said I wouldn't hazard a guess on it, and I don't think it's prudent to do that, actually. Actually, I thank the congressman for pointing out that there are certainly absolutely similarities in both the sort of a theoretical, conceptual counterinsurgency approach way in Afghanistan with Iraq, and also in some of the other respects there in terms when you talk about political legitimacy and all the rest. But there we tried to, frankly, to avoid looking out too far. If you look at the joint campaign plan that Ambassador Crocker and I developed a few months into the period of the surge, we laid out a horizon of about 3 years, and that's about as far as we looked. That doesn't mean that you don't have long-term goals and objectives that are trying to be achieved, but we laid out measurable and measured objectives during that period, and that was the approach that we took there, and I think that's probably a fairly wise approach to take, while certainly having your eye on the horizon and what it is you're trying to do, but to very much focus on the core objectives and then the very necessary activities and tasks that have to be performed to achieve those core objectives en route to perhaps more expansive goals long term.
Let me expand that question to other members of the panel, because I think the purpose of the book is not so much to say the time commitment should be 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, but rather to say that if this is a challenge of the enormity and complexity that all of the panelists have outlined, that we need to be able to think farther into the future about what we want to achieve in order to get to the sorts of objectives that I think the General was just outlining. I'm interested to know, from the perspective of Afghan, European, and a member of Congress, whether in fact we have the ability to sustain a commitment to Afghanistan in the long term, and whether the Afghans can sustain that commitment from us.
Let me just build on it, because he's just laid out, in fact, why I think it's logical to explain what I just did. And that is that, again, you want to know eventually where you want to go. Obviously, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. But you also have to have some waypoints along the way. And that should be your focus. You want to get to those waypoints. Certainly you've got to have the long term. But what I'm really trying to say here today, and one of the points I tried to make, is that this is going to take a sustained, substantial commitment. And that is the key. And it will take a sustained, substantial commitment, not just in Afghanistan, but also in Pakistan, and one that obviously engages the regional actors. And I didn't mean to be too dismissive of the Iran question. It's just that I don't want to get completely going down that road, because it's a very hot topic, Andrew, as you know, as you tried to tease out of me. I mean, clearly there are both, as I pointed out, there are some common objectives that no one, I think, would disagree on. Again, as another panelist pointed out, that Iran is concerned about the narcotics trade. It doesn't want to see Sunni extremists running, or certainly ultra fundamentalist extremists running Afghanistan again any more than other folks do. Having said that, as I also pointed out, there are some pretty substantial points of conflict out there as well in the greater strategic context in which one considers the common interests. And of course, those are where I'm happy again to hand that to the diplomats and the policymakers to weigh those very big issues that are out there, some of those that we confronted in Iraq, in fact. But now let me hand it off to
any of our other panelists want to comment.
Sure. The first point is, in comparative terms, a successful counterinsurgency has taken 10 to 15 years. That's just a historical record. And I think one needs to take a horizon like that into account. But having said that, the question is, what role does the international community play?
That's exactly the question, yeah.
Is it a catalyst to build Afghan capabilities so they can get to the act of solving our problems ourselves, or does it do the job? That is a major difference because there are trade-offs. Mm-hmm. In terms of investing in Afghan capabilities, a shorter period of maximum front-loading of investment will produce the type of results that will sustain the effort by the Afghans. And I think one has to be able to differentiate this clearly. This is what did not take place between 2002 and 2005, which was the golden open moment. Afghanistan was not resourced. We were begging for resources, and nobody was coming forth. I reminded both the White House and others at that time that $1 million then would be equivalent to $100 million 5 years later. And that kind of investment did not come. Now, in the last 4 years, we've lost substantial momentum. And regaining that momentum is going to require a massive investment and effort, at least for a period of 3 years. But that could set the conditions for the transformation that we need. So international forces need not be engaged with as intense degree of involvement if the type of strategy is one of co-production with the Afghans.
Yeah, it's about the character of the involvement.
Exactly.
And again, we tried to make that same point in Iraq, Elizabeth, as well. And I think, in fact, what is happening in Iraq now, which is not Afghanistan, but what is happening in Iraq is that character of the involvement is changing. As you heard from Dr. Muwafiq al-Rabai earlier today, I mean, there should be no question after hearing him about the way in which Iraqi security forces and Iraqi governmental authorities have assumed not just a variety of security tasks, but a variety of other responsibilities together, also over the past year and a half in particular, and with the implementation now of the strategic agreement even more so.
Well, I think there is a parallelism between European public opinion and Afghan public opinion. When Afghans complain about, I gave a list of the complaints of the Afghans. These are in many ways mirrored in European public opinion. When they see that there is enormous corruption, bad governance, this eats and civilian casualties. This eats into the support that Europe gives to Afghanistan or for the Afghan operation. And there is also a catch-22 situation in terms of US involvement. The US feels it needs to become more involved because we Europeans are not doing enough. But the more the Americans do, the more likely it is that the Europeans will feel that this has become an American operation. So we need to find a way quite soon to cut the Gordian knot of this dilemma.
Well, in fact, if I could build on that, because one of the efforts just in the recent months has been to dual hat, if you will, General McKiernan as the U.S. commander as well as the NATO commander. And the intent is to achieve greater unity of effort. And because we had a very interesting situation where you had certain organizations that were operationally under him but reporting directly, in fact, to Central Command. And again, that causes certain challenges when in terms of that unity of effort. And I think you've identified a challenge that the United States has as it does go forward with the increase of forces, the additional deployments into Afghanistan, and that is at the same time to take even greater, make greater effort to make it a coordinated effort with our alliance partners. I mean, it's the reason I've been in London, Paris, and Rome just in the past 2 or 3 months, I guess it is, and going to Brussels and Mons and other allied countries as well. So it is hugely important that it, again, be a coordinated and combined effort. And I think that those of us who served in the Balkans actually have some experience with, frankly, how that can be done. And I would hold those experiences out as reasonable examples, actually, of cases in which, yes, there is a substantial U.S. involvement, usually the lead nation, but also very substantial alliance contributions and everyone working together. Even, by the way, though, there are still caveats. I mean, we've had caveats all the time. And you, as an operations chief, in fact, in Bosnia, I had a matrix on my desk of, you know, what countries could do what. You can work through that. And I'm not saying that we applaud those, but I mean, you can work through these things. And that's what we have to do.
I'll just add quickly, I think if we view this situation, if we see accountability and anti-corruption efforts and other transitional justice efforts as post-conflict strategies, if we see them as luxuries independent from the security agenda, we will not see a shift for a long, long time. We can't militarize our way out of this problem, particularly not by continuing say more arms to some of the local governing structures for that to happen. If, however, we see these as a primary leverage point for changing the balance of political power, and again, I don't mean this in sort of going after easy targets way. I mean very tough accountability agenda, whether that would be for war crimes, corruption, or narcotics. You're generally going after the same set of actors. That, I think, will shift the balance of power in ways that will be disruptive in the short term, but create the opportunity for a near to midterm turnaround that would be significant. So we can't see those as separate tracks. I think, again, those coming out of the Iraq situation understand that. I think those, what I've seen on the ground, unfortunately, in Afghanistan has not always reflected that sense. So I think if we get serious about going right to the root cause of this, then we can see a turnaround in the near to midterm.
Well, I have the unfortunate task of ending this panel because I think we all wish we could hear more, but it has been a long and I think remarkable day. And I'm going to turn it over to our chairman, Robin West, to give the final remark.
My final remarks will be blessedly brief. I want to thank this panel, and I want to thank all the participants who've been up here, but I also want to thank all of you. And finally, I want to thank again the staff of the Institute of Peace. I think they put on an extraordinary and really unique production today.